Hey, what is up? This is Derek with 13 Series Engineering, and I'm coming to you with a really cool video today. This is my first video on YouTube, but actually this is our company's first video as well, and it's the first video in a series that we're doing on something that's really important to us and really important to me that I think a lot of you don't know about, and this is server-side single-page apps. That's right, server-side rendered single-page applications. This is something that's starting to catch on. They're starting to get a lot of traction, and people are starting to ditch React, Angular, and Vue in favor of server-side frameworks like Symfony, Laravel, Ruby on Rails. And I'm going to have a whole video series here where I take you guys through basically how to build one of these. It's going to be kind of like a tutorial. It's not necessarily going to be code along, although we are going to write some code together. But it's just like a basic kind of architectural overview of how this works, and this is going to be done in Symfony and PHP, but it is essentially the concepts framework agnostic. You could use it with any framework. If you want to use it with Rails, you could do that. At any type of server-side framework that renders markup, you could apply these same concepts, and it'll work just the same. So basically, first video here, we're going to do the framework for this single page app. We're going to get like everything working and functioning the way it's supposed to, and then we're going to go through all these different steps and build things out. So I have a test basically site that I've built here. It's just a regular static site. When you navigate, it does hard page reloads. You can see right here in the console. Just do a refresh. So we have a full page reload, JavaScript, CSS, MP3 file. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but I got sounds on the menu, hovers, and things like that. All that stuff gets loaded, just like a regular website. We're going to navigate, and same thing. Hard page refresh, things get loaded again. Some stuff's cached, obviously. But it's just a regular website, just like you could build with WordPress or anything that's available out there. This is Symfony 6 is what I'm using, and Bootstrap 5 as well. And I just have some sounds, some animations, but other than that, it's a pretty basic website. I don't have any data. Everything is just dummy data, just markup. And this site, if you can't tell, is kind of like a tribute to Starfield, which just came out. We have the Starfield looking text and colors, and like these input styles. They're all kind of like the Starfield style. And what this site basically is going to be, the content isn't so important. Like I said, it's not really hooked up to anything right now, but any type of data or database. I don't even have a login for this. But we're going to get there eventually. We're going to build it out completely. The idea with this is like a spaceship parts wiki. So you can like add parts, you can use other people's parts, and you can build your own, ship essentially, like as many as you want. So it's kind of just a fun like concept, and it'll give us a chance to get into some cooler GUI graphical components that you can do in a browser. And other than that, like not a whole lot's done on this. Like I said, we don't even have a login screen, just some really basic things, just basic controls that don't even do anything yet. It's just to demonstrate a point. And I'm just going to turn my sound down a little because that's kind of annoying. The one thing that is done here is that we do at least have like some responsiveness. Stuff does kind of break, but at least my menu's collapsing. We're gonna get to everything when we get time and actually build this out for real. But for right now, it's just kind of like a mildly responsive site with some basic components. And we're going to be using, I'm going to put the link in the description, we're going to be using Symfony UX right here. This is their site. It's got all these cool components you can basically use to make a PHP app behave like a single page app and be a single page app. And specifically, there's a couple ways to do this, but today what we're going to be going over is Turbo. So we're going to be adding Turbo to this regular site, and we're going to be talking about some of the concepts, some of the architecture behind Turbo and how that all works and how you can use it. And Turbo, I'll also throw this link in the description too. Turbo is framework agnostic. It's actually a JS dependency, so you can use Turbo in any application you want that you have JS for. So super easy. There's just a few extra steps if you are going to use this in just JS without like Symfony or Rails or something like that. But we're going to do two examples of Turbo and how this works. The first one is going to be Turbo Drive. Then we're going to do Turbo Frames. Both of those are going to make this be a single page app. And then in the next video, we're going to be going over how to do this like basically without Turbo or any type of helper, just vanilla JS and templates. How can you have server-side rendered markup, be a single page app without using any helpers, just custom JS that you wrote yourself? So we'll be going through all that stuff. And then in the following videos, we'll be just totally building this site out. Cool UI controls, cool table controls, stuff like that, cool ways to look at data, lots of graphics, and of course, there's not going to be a single page app without WebSockets. So probably be looking at a few things. One of those is Turbo Streams, which Turbo Streams is essentially works like a type of WebSocket. We might use Mercury Hub as a WebSocket, but what I really want to do is I really want to use Apache Kafka for this and make a Kafka stream with consumers on the client side. And I think Kafka is a lot of things that most people aren't really familiar with, the advantages to Kafka and how it can be better than WebSocket, and some of the things you can leverage with a Kafka stream that make your life a lot easier than having to spin up a WebSocket hub or a WebSocket server and deal with disconnects and all that stuff. So that's something we'll definitely get to later as we continue to build everything out. But before we get into that, I do just want to talk like for a minute about single page apps and MVC and how that all works, and why it's important to do a server-side rendered single page app, and why that's probably going to take everything over in just a few years, and why you should get on the bandwagon. Basically, when you think of a single page app, you're thinking of like React, most notably, or Angular or Vue. And those are, what people consider single page apps, because what defines a single page app is just one refresh, right? One hard page reload, when you navigate to the site, and everything gets loaded at that point, and that's like your, you don't refresh the page again after that. And that's what makes a single page app. So essentially the flow is you have a request, whether it's initial or from like an Axios request, you get JSON or some type of data. That JSON goes into your component layer, your components in Angular or React, and those components, they have these lifecycle hooks, right? Like init and view init and all these things. So they get the data, the component gets constructed, and that component has a template in it that you've written that's markup, and it has those things like ngIf, ngFor, all those. That's not actual HTML that you're writing. Those are template files that Angular then interprets and basically renders out on the client side the markup that you're going to see. That rendered markup goes to your router outlet, and it replaces whatever's in that router outlet, which on initial page load, nothing's there. But when you change views, when you do a navigation, it just swaps all that markup out with whatever comes in. Why is that not good? Well, it's not that it's bad, but you're doing client-side rendering, so the client is paying for like each line of markup basically with performance. That's more JavaScript that has to get written. It's more JavaScript that has to get compiled. It adds to your browser memory. And single page apps, even a few years ago, they used to really, just in general, I think people underutilize Webpack and entry points to optimize how much JS and how much data is loaded. But I'm sure everyone's seen a single page app that loads up, and it just takes like forever to log in and get that initial page view, because it's doing all these requests, it's loading all this data, and it's all this stuff that the user's not even going to see for a while. They have to navigate around to find it. So it's like, what's the point of doing that? That's insane. You should just load stuff as needed. That's literally like the definition of lazy loading, is like loading it on the back end and allowing the user to interact. So this is one way to kind of increase that performance and just make things way more snappier. And people talk about Vue like that. Like Vue.js is way snappier than React. It's really just lighter, and you're using modules to like load stuff kind of on demand and as needed in those entry points. It's not that it typically it is less JavaScript, but um, why people think it's snappier is just because it's like chunked appropriately and the scope of things are right, and it's just doing a little bit less than like what React or Angular is doing. So a server-side single page app, you're going to have your backend that just like would return a JSON response, it's going to do all this stuff, maybe API calls, going to handle the initial request. It's going to use an ORM to get data from a database and do like mutation or access. It does logic, calculations, computations, different things to get all the data that the user needs to see and interact with. But then instead of returning a JSON structure, it returns that markup, that HTML. That goes into some intermediate layer that's very, very quick. For Turbo, it uses Ajax, and we're going to go over all that. And then basically you have a spot in your DOM, which for Turbo Drive, it's the entire body tag. Or if it's turbo frames, it's just that frame. And the markup just gets switched out. It just removes the markup that's there with a new markup that's coming in. And then you can use things like Kafka or WebSocket to get that real-time like stream data. But essentially they're working the same way. You're just getting the advantage of server-side rendered markup. Things are a lot faster. You have SEO, which in single-page apps, you don't get that SEO advantage. It's harder to crawl because all you have is an index HTML file that's got like nothing on it. Um, so, if you want an app that has SEO or has some front-facing stuff, this is like literally the only way to do it and actually get effective SEO. And all that stuff just gets rendered so much quicker. You load way less JavaScript. There's just like 100 advantages. There's no reason not to do it. So we're going to be going through all that stuff today and how it works. The other thing I wanted to talk about with single-page apps is MVC. Model View Controller. Everyone that's like, at least a second or third year computer science student knows what MVC is. Basically, when you have a single page app like Angular or something that has to do Axios or RxJS requests, what's going to happen is your model that is in a service that's getting shown in the view, printed out on the page, that model isn't the actual model, right? Because it's not the database, it's not the backend, it's just a model that is in browser memory in the form of a JSON object. So that's not truly the model you're interacting with. That model has to then have CRUD operations happen. It has to get sent to the backend to update, to do things, to interact like on a global scale with, if other users access that model, um, they're not going to have the same data that you are, and that's why we need to use WebSocket and all these different things. You're not getting the same model. Even if you make changes, you have to do some type of put, some type of save or post request in order to actually interact with that model in data. And on top of that, your controller is kind of like a fake controller because you need to interact with that controller that's in the back end, that's on your API layer. And so you're going to have to write the same code twice, and that's a lot of Angular developers run into that problem. They're got a service in Angular, like a app-wide, a global service, and then their API is doing exactly the same work. And I think that's another reason why people are really jumping on Vue lately, is that you're literally just making a request. You're not really doing any of those computations or doing any of that work and then saving it. It's just a way to interact with the API that a user can see in a GUI. And that's the other advantage of a server-side rendered single-page app, is that the controller and the model, there's only one of them. They're not in JS. They're not in the client side. You update stuff as needed with WebSocket or Kafka, but the data layer and the logic layer, it's all server-side. It's way faster, and you only have to write the code once. So huge advantage. All right, we can get started in just a minute here. Links I'm going to put in the description. We got the Hotwire Turbo page, so you guys can check that out. Symfony UX, and then this is the actual Symfony like API docs for using Symfony UX. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add what's called Turbo Drive to this app. And Turbo Drive, like we talked about replacing markup, it's going to take the body tag and it's going to replace it with a new body tag. So it's going to, when you do a request, a navigation request to a different page, it's not going to navigate. That's actually going to be an AJAX request, and it's going to get back that web page, but it's only going to take the body tag and then replace the current document's body tag with that new body, with that new HTML. And I'll tell you, I did a little cheating. I already have Turbo installed here, and I just deactivated it to show that these hard refreshes. So getting Turbo activated is really easy. All you do is do composer require Turbo UX, and it just automatically installs it into a Symfony project and enables it. It's super, super easy. It's globally enabled by default. So to turn it off for the first part of this video, what I did in my nav here is I added this data turbo false, which turns off turbo navigation. Now we can set that to true and it'll turn it on, or we can just get rid of it. And we'll just get rid of all these where data turbo is true. And now we're going to have turbo drive enabled on all of these nav A tags. Alright, here's how we can show this. If we look in our network, so we had the initial page load, right? Just do a refresh, all this stuff loaded. Then when we navigate, you see our requests are just piling up. We're not reloading the page. We're just getting the DOM from these endpoints, and you can see the whole entire document comes back. All this markup comes back, and I'll show you here in the elements. Our body tag, when we navigate, see that body tag just gets replaced. And the other thing that happens is the head of the document, it will look through every node in the head and it'll find any differences and then like update those differences. If there's a node in a different position, if there's like a new style or script tag or something, or link to something, it'll replace all those in the head. One thing I did want to mention, this repo for this is actually public. I'll throw that down there too, and you guys can go fork or branch this repo if you want. You can go, play around with it, do your own stuff. And maybe when we're done with all these videos, I'm going to do some DevOps, and I'll do like a little tutorial about how you can deploy a Symfony app really, really quick, really cheap, and we'll throw this out there on the internet for everyone to use and have some fun with. Well, we're going to really get it functioning well. It's going to be cooking. It's going to be a fun game. But as you can see, we've just done all these reloads. Now, or not reloads, but body replacements with Turbo Drive. If you look, here's one disadvantage. This MP3 for the menu rollover sounds has been loaded on every request. And that's pretty frustrating. Like, it's not a huge file, but you could have some things that are pretty big that get loaded in there. And why is this happening? Well, that menu rollover sound, if we go to our main view, and by the way, all these twigs essentially in our controller, we're just loading this twig which extends our main document view, and we're using blocks for this. If you're not familiar with twig blocks and the extends and all the twig functions, you should definitely check it out. They're super helpful. There's so much stuff you can do, especially with inheriting and reusing components. It's probably one of the best markup templates there is Twig. In my opinion, it's way better than Blade. And with some of the new things Twig's added, like custom components and different things, it's basically, there's no advantage to using a Blade file. This is just as good with a lot of benefits. But as you can see, we have a stimulus controller on inside of our body block. And if we look at our body block, that's inside the body tag. And like I said, the whole body tag is getting replaced. So when that gets replaced, our stimulus controller gets replaced with itself. And in that stimulus controller on connect, we're loading that MP3 audio file so that we can then have our menu rollover. And so that gets loaded every time the body tag gets replaced, which is pretty annoying. Which brings us to our second option, what we're going to look at for making this a single page app, and that's Turbo Frames. We're just going to have to do a little bit of code here. We can get turbo frames working. Um, and we're not going to have to worry about reloading all this stuff. We're only, instead of reloading the whole body with a turbo frame, we're going to load just a little part of it, whatever part you want. It doesn't have to be a whole view. You can even just do little tiny cards or components get reloaded with turbo navigations. So the first thing we're going to do in all of these different views, I got 4 views, right? We're going to go ahead and we're going to replace all the blocks, all the extensions, all that stuff. We're going to inject turbo frames into all of these. I'm going to do that here in my main view. And for whatever reason, PHP Storm does not like the turbo frame tag. I'm not sure why. I haven't really figured that out. It doesn't recognize it. I think there's probably an extension or a plugin I'm missing. But turbo frames, you have to give them an ID. And what happens is let's say in this view, we just kept everything the way it is. We can actually do that, and it's going to work. I don't like to do it for cleanliness, but if we just keep all this stuff, if we keep everything like it is, which, by the way, if you have not updated PHP Storm recently, you should. I'm not sure when this came out, but all new menu and folder icons, everything looks like awesome. I'm loving the look and feel of the new PHP Storm on macOS. You guys should definitely check that out if you haven't. If you're an IntelliJ PHP Storm person, they did some updates, and it looks really, really awesome. But we can leave all this stuff. So we're still going to get the main view, the document head, all of these things. But what Turbo is going to do is it's just going to take this turbo frame and it's going to look for, it's just going to take that markup, it's going to throw everything else out. And it's going to look for that matching turbo frame in the current DOM and then just replace them, just like that. So it doesn't matter if you leave a bunch of stuff in here, it's going to ignore it. But also, you're paying for that to get rendered in time complexity. You're never going to notice it depending on the size of the document, but I just like to get rid of it. Might as well just keep it clean. And this is probably the markup that we're going to go with, like production for this, is with just these turbo frame components or views, if you will. So we're just going to go and add all these. I think there's one more, right? That one's good. That one's good. That's good. That's good. And here we go, this one. Cool. Alright, that's basically all we need to do with our views. And now, if you look, I already had this added as well because I was playing with it earlier. But let's take a look at the DOM real quick so we can understand this. If I didn't have this tag here, this attribute, data turbo frame, this wouldn't work. And this is where a lot of people get confused. It's confusing in their docs sometime. But if we look at, we got our nav here, right? And then we got our section, which is our content, and we just have a flex box on this, so they're split. But they're not nodes of each other. So these A tags are not inside of where the turbo frame is going to be. I should probably actually reload that so you can see it. Oop. Right, we have to go to main. And here's the other thing I forgot. With turbo frames, you're not going to have your browser stack working right off the bat. You're not going to have history and URLs and all that. But in JavaScript, you can add navigation, and there's tags for it too in Hotwired in the docs where you can basically, you know, change your browser stack as you're navigating and changing turbo frames. Here's one thing we forgot. This turbo frame, there's nothing getting loaded in here. We have to navigate to load things. So that's obviously not good for the user. Once they log in, they go to this main view, which they need to hit that main route right here, which brings up their basic main, you know, view with the nav, with their content pane, all that. This needs like a default frame that it's going to load. So all you have to do is add a source attribute here, and that source attribute is going to be the route URL. So we want to start with this shipyard view, So, but we could do any of them. Maybe create a part. That'll be our default view. So we just have to go and add, create a part into that default load. What most people do with this is hit on page load. So a lot of people will add a frame or a view, or you could just put markup in here. Let's just look at that. We can just you can put something in here, and it's not going to get replaced until that turbo frame gets replaced. So we have hello here. So a lot of people will put a spinner or some type of loading animation in the turbo frame, and while it's loading, you just automatically get that spinner, and then it gets replaced once the frame renders, especially if you have something that takes a minute to render. But we're going to give it a default route, which it's just going to do an AJAX request to that route. Of course, it messed up my nav. We'll put it back to shipyard. There we go. Okay. So our main view now renders shipyard to start with because we gave it this source. And as you can see, the body tag isn't even getting, it's not updating at all. The only thing that's updating is we have this turbo frame in here. See, look at that. That's the only DOM that is changing. And a huge advantage of this is that you can just, you have really simple routes in the back end that render out twig files. So when you navigate, you get the most up-to-date data off of the server. And in TypeScript apps and Angular and React, you don't always get that stuff. You have to re-request the data even when you navigate sometimes, depending on how your components are structured. And a lot of people do this wrong, and I think that's another reason why Vue is so popular, is that it forces you to do the right thing, whereas Angular doesn't. You can navigate around and not get new data. You might not have your lifecycle hooks or your constructors done right, and so you're not getting new data. Different things have to happen. But this basically absolves you of that. It just renders fresh new markup with the most recent data on navigation. And that's the advantage of a turbo stream, is that when stuff changes, each row in a table can be a turbo stream. It just updates automatically, and it's just done with markup. You don't need to take a JSON file and then have it put into all these different places. It's just really simple HTML to write. But one point I was trying to make is these data turbo tags in our nav, data turbo frame. That basically says what frame in the DOM by ID is going to get replaced. If we didn't have that here, it would do a full body replacement, a full page replacement, not a page reload, but a replacement because it is used to the tags, the nav, being inside of the turbo frame. So if you have this tag inside of a turbo frame, you don't need to have this data turbo frame attribute. It will automatically do that. It will automatically replace the tag it's in. So one thing we could do is we could have our nav inside of the turbo frame each time. It's a component, so you could just require it inside of your turbo frame like this. Include components nav HTML twig, and then we wouldn't need that data turbo tag. But every time that turbo frame gets rendered, you're re-rendering the nav, so that's really not efficient. It's just a few lines of markup. There's no data. It's not a big deal, but it's just whenever you can save markup, you definitely should. But basically, that's just too easy. I know this isn't like a code along or a how to set up a Symfony project. If you guys are interested in stuff like that, I can definitely show you. Just let me know in the comments. We can go through a new project just from scratch and go through setting up all this stuff. It's really easy. Honestly, using Symfony is kind of like cheating sometimes because it just does so much stuff for you. As long as you understand how to do good web dev, basic markup and basic CSS and JS that interacts with a DOM, that's all you need. It's super easy. And then in PHP it gets more complicated and allows you to do a lot of really, really crazy stuff with service injection and service containers and all that. But we're going to be getting into all that stuff in future videos. I just wanted to do a quick demo of how you can just create a single page app from a static website. Um, and if there's other things you guys want to see, you want to see this with a different framework, or you want to see different ways to do this, or some more in-depth explanation, just let me know. Let me know what type of stuff you guys want to see. I'd be more than happy to throw it into future videos. The other thing before I go, I wanted to show you guys is this new tool for Symfony UX, which is Swap. I'm not sure why I can't find it right now. There we go. Swap is basically Turbo Drive, but it does like an animation. It just replaces DOM with other DOM, and it animates it. And in the future, that's something I do want to go into as well, is that Turbo offers the ability, you have to do it in JavaScript, but it offers you the ability to like extend its default controller and to add animations and keyframes to that like transition time. So when you're, getting new markup, when stuff's happening, you can add these cool opacity or slide animations, and that really adds to the single page app feel, because when you have an app that's not really doing anything with data, like we have right now, it's just markup. It's really hard to tell the difference between, like, yeah, you can tell if you're on a slow internet connection that it's actually loading the page, but the difference between this and what we were getting earlier wasn't a whole lot, because it's just a fast page load. There's like nothing on these. But that's all I got. Next video should be coming out in a few days, or maybe about a week, and we'll really start building this out. Probably go into login, authentication, and some of the big advantages you have with a server-side single-page app to doing authentication, security, forms, CSRF protection, a lot of really amazing stuff. We'll do turbo frame forms. We'll do all these things that you really, it would be a pain in the butt or almost impossible to write out in Angular or React, or you have to add like a ton of dependencies that just take up space in Webpack that you probably don't need. I'm a huge fan of doing custom code, custom JS whenever you can, instead of installing a dependency that the version could update. You could have security issues. There's just different problems that happen when you start using all these dependencies. But that's what a lot of web dev has become now, is people don't want to write out these little one-liner or just quick couple-line functions to do cool JavaScript stuff. They'd rather install a library that's huge and just slows everything down. But we are fixing that one tutorial at a time here, showing you how to do all this stuff from scratch, easy as possible, low code. That's all I got. Thanks so much. I will see you guys next time.